Every woman who has ever caused a man to fall deeply and intensely in love with her has done something most women today tend to avoid because they believe it will make them look desperate. Yet this is exactly why so many women never experience a man becoming completely captivated by them. Not in a toxic or controlling sense, but in that powerful way where he keeps thinking about her and starts to feel like life without her just doesn't feel the same anymore. There is one simple behavior, a small gesture, that can create a shift inside a man almost instantly. When it happens, it reaches him on an emotional and physical level he can't fully understand or control. It has nothing to do with appearance, success, or having a perfect personality. It is something any woman is capable of doing, yet most avoid it today. What most people don't understand is that a man doesn't first respond with his thoughts. His body reacts before his mind even catches up. The nervous system is always quietly observing, picking up signals long before any conscious judgment takes place. Over a long history of human behavior, people have developed a strong instinct to sense emotion, intention, and presence in others within seconds. That is why a man can meet a woman and suddenly feel something shift inside him right away. He may not be able to explain it, but his body already knows. He might feel calm, drawn in, or unusually comfortable, as if something in her presence is signaling safety and trust, before any logical reasoning begins inside his awareness. Most women believe attraction comes from trying to impress a man. They focus on being entertaining, telling impressive stories, looking perfect, or showing how independent and successful their life is. But real attraction doesn't start there. A man's response is often decided on a deeper level before his thoughts are even fully formed. That's why those first moments matter so much emotionally. When he meets a woman who carries a grounded, calm energy, his system registers it immediately. It creates ease, familiarity, and trust that he cannot easily put into words. In those early seconds, his gut is already shaping a feeling of connection and safety, even before he has time to consciously understand what is happening. This gesture is actually a combination of three simple elements working together. The first is calm, intentional energy. You interact with him in a steady way, with clear presence, but without rushing the moment. You're not trying to speed things up or force a reaction. Instead, you allow his nervous system time to adjust to you, to feel safe and grounded in your presence. This kind of energy communicates emotional maturity and shows that you are aware of your own intentions while also being respectful of his emotional space. It creates a balanced atmosphere where nothing feels pressured, yet everything feels meaningful and real at the same time. The second and third elements are warm, natural eye contact and comfortable silence. The eye contact is not intense or overwhelming, and it is not shy or avoidant either. It simply says, "I'm present with you right now, and I don't need anything to feel okay in this moment." Then comes silence, which many people rush to fill out of nervousness. But when you stay relaxed in it, silence becomes powerful instead of awkward. It carries confidence, ease, and emotional grounding. It communicates that you are comfortable with yourself and with him, and there is no pressure to perform or constantly fill the space with words. The relaxed silence is the part most people struggle with. The moment there's even a brief pause in conversation, many women feel an urge to jump in and fill it just to avoid what they think is awkward tension. But silence, when you're comfortable with it, actually carries a very different kind of energy. Instead of feeling empty or uncomfortable, it becomes something grounding and deeply present. It creates space for connection to settle naturally without pressure or forced words getting in the way. When you can stay calm in those quiet moments, it sends a subtle but powerful message without saying anything at all. It communicates that you don't feel the need to constantly perform or keep the conversation alive just for the sake of avoiding stillness. You're simply at ease with yourself and at ease with the person you're with. That comfort turns silence into something magnetic rather than uncomfortable, because it reflects confidence, emotional stability, and genuine presence in the moment. When these three elements come together, something subtle but powerful happens on a physiological level. The calm, grounded energy helps activate his parasympathetic system, which is the part of the body linked to relaxation, safety, and emotional openness. The steady, warm eye contact can encourage feelings of bonding and emotional closeness, often associated with oxytocin, the hormone connected to trust and connection. And the ease within silence creates a sense of emotional safety, where neither person feels pressured to perform or fill every gap, allowing natural comfort to build between you. To make this feel authentic, it should never be treated like a technique or something to perform. It only works when it comes from genuine presence. You're not doing it to get a reaction or to pull something out of him, but because you're actually grounded in the moment and enjoying the interaction as it is. At its core, this is not manipulation at all, but the natural expression of a woman who feels secure within herself and doesn't rely on external validation to feel complete or at ease. In today's world, women are often encouraged to stay constantly in a driven, always doing mindset, focused on control, achievement, and output. But in more intimate, emotional moments, there is a different kind of energy that becomes powerful. It's softer, more open, more receptive. When you allow that state of being to show up, it creates balance in the interaction, and a man often responds by naturally becoming more present and engaged as well. Instead of trying to be more impressive, more mysterious, or more polished, the real shift comes from simply being present. The calm energy, the warm eye contact, and the comfortable silence are not strategies. They are natural signs of someone who is grounded, self-assured, and comfortable in their own worth without needing to prove anything. There's also something important that often gets overlooked in this whole idea of presence and connection, and that's the role of emotional pacing. People don't actually connect deeply just because of words or actions alone, but because of rhythm between two nervous systems. When someone is anxious, fast, or overly effortful, the interaction tends to feel tight. When someone is steady, unhurried, and grounded, it creates a slower emotional rhythm that others can naturally sync with. That's part of why calmness can feel so impactful. It changes the tempo of the entire interaction without saying anything directly. Another layer is that most people are used to overstimulation in communication. Constant talking, over-explaining, and filling every pause has become the default for many social interactions. Because of that, stillness stands out, not because silence itself is magical, but because it breaks a pattern people are conditioned to. In that break, attention becomes sharper, awareness increases, and emotional signals become more noticeable. So even small things like a pause or a steady gaze can feel more meaningful simply because they are not competing with noise. It's also worth understanding that real connection doesn't come from trying to create a moment, but from being willing to let a moment exist without controlling it. The urge to perform usually comes from uncertainty, wanting to be liked, understood, or accepted. When that urgency is present, it subtly changes body language, timing, and tone. On the other hand, when someone feels internally steady, they don't rush the interaction, and that lack of urgency is often what creates a sense of ease in the other person. But this is where it needs balance, because emotional presence is not about being passive or detached. It's not about staying silent all the time or withholding expression. Human connection still needs warmth, responsiveness, and genuine engagement. The difference is whether those actions come from pressure or from ease. One feels like trying to secure something, the other feels like simply sharing a moment. A lot of what gets labeled as attraction triggers online is actually just human sensitivity to emotional congruence. When someone's inner state matches their outer behavior, calm inside, calm outside, present inside, present outside, people tend to trust them more easily. When there's mismatch, like anxiety underneath forced confidence, it can feel slightly off, even if nothing obvious is wrong. So the deeper idea here isn't about learning how to act around men or anyone else. It's about reducing internal noise. The less mental pressure you carry into a moment, the more space there is for real connection to form naturally. And when that happens, things like eye contact, silence, tone, and presence stop being tools and become just normal expressions of how comfortable you are in yourself and in the interaction itself. Another important layer to understand is that connection is far more about emotional safety than intensity. A lot of people assume that strong feelings come from dramatic energy, fast chemistry, or constant stimulation. But in reality, those things often create excitement without stability. What tends to last and deepen is the sense that you can simply exist around someone without feeling judged, rushed, or emotionally overwhelmed. That feeling is usually built in very small moments, not big ones. When someone is calm in your presence, it creates a kind of psychological permission for the other person to relax too. People don't always realize how much they are mirroring each other's internal state. If one person is tense, the other often becomes slightly more alert. If one person is grounded, the other tends to soften over time. This is not something that is consciously controlled. It's a natural co-regulation process between nervous systems that happens quietly in the background of interaction. Silence plays a major role in this because it removes distraction and forces both people to sit in the reality of the moment. For someone who is used to filling gaps, silence can initially feel like uncertainty, but when there is no internal pressure to fix it, that same silence becomes a shared space rather than an empty one. It gives emotional signals time to land. A glance, a smile, a shift in posture, all of these become more noticeable and meaningful when there is no constant stream of words competing with them. There is also something deeply human about being around someone who does not seem to be trying to manage your perception of them. People can often sense when they are being handled or when the other person is trying to create a specific impression. Even if it is subtle, it creates distance. On the other hand, when someone is simply present without an agenda, it creates a feeling of honesty in the interaction. That honesty is what allows trust to build in a quiet, gradual way. At the same time, presence is not about removing personality or becoming overly still or detached. It is not about suppressing expression. It's about removing the internal rush behind expression. When words, eye contact, and silence come from a place that is not trying to achieve anything, they carry a very different emotional weight. They feel more grounded, more real, and less like effort. What often shifts everything in relationships is not learning how to do something specific, but learning how to stop over-interpreting every pause, every look, every second of quiet. When you are no longer internally reacting to every moment, you begin to show up differently. That difference is subtle, but it changes how others experience you because it removes pressure from the interaction. In the end, the most impactful part of all of this is not silence or eye contact or energy alone, but the internal state behind them. When someone is internally settled, they don't need to manage the moment. They can allow it to unfold. And in that space, connection tends to form more naturally, without force, without urgency, and without the feeling that anything has to be chased or secured. When someone is internally focused on getting a certain response, being liked, or making things go a certain way, there is usually an underlying tension in their presence. Even if they appear calm on the surface, that inner agenda subtly shapes how they speak, pause, and react. People don't just respond to words, they respond to that underlying pressure. When that pressure is absent, the interaction feels lighter, not because anything dramatic is happening, but because nothing is being forced. In that kind of space, the other person doesn't feel managed or evaluated. They feel like they can just be themselves without having to match an expectation. That is often what creates the sense of ease people later describe as chemistry, even though it actually started as emotional relaxation. Another important thing to understand is that real presence is not about being quiet or overly controlled. It is about being internally unoccupied by fear of how the moment is being perceived. Someone can be talking, laughing, or sharing stories and still be deeply present if they are not self-monitoring every second. Likewise, someone can be silent but still feel internally tense if they are overthinking what the silence means. So it's never about the outer behavior alone, but the internal experience behind it. What makes calm energy so noticeable is that most people are not used to experiencing it consistently in everyday interaction. A lot of communication is filled with subtle urgency, trying to impress, fill gaps, avoid awkwardness, or keep attention. When that urgency is missing, it creates contrast, and human attention naturally leans toward what feels different from the norm. That's part of why steady presence can feel so compelling without any effort to amplify it. There is also a soft emotional safety that comes from predictability in someone's energy. Not predictability in a boring sense, but in the sense that the person feels emotionally steady. You are not constantly trying to guess where they stand or how they will react to a pause, a shift in tone, or a moment of quiet. That steadiness reduces mental load in the interaction, which is why people often feel more comfortable without being able to explain exactly why. At a deeper level, this all comes back to self-relation. The more comfortable someone is with themselves, the less they need the interaction to prove anything. They are not using the moment to validate their worth, so they are free to actually experience it. And when a person is fully experiencing the moment instead of trying to control it, their presence naturally becomes more open, more grounded, and more real. That's why the most powerful shift is internal rather than behavioral. When you stop treating interactions as something you need to win or secure, you start to show up differently without trying. And that difference is often what changes how deeply people feel your presence, because it removes the hidden tension that usually sits underneath most social behavior. What you're really describing here is less about specific gestures and more about how emotional safety and presence are experienced between two people. Attraction, especially the kind that feels deep and steady, doesn't usually come from effort or performance. It often comes from how regulated and grounded someone feels in your presence. When a person is calm, unhurried, and not trying to control the interaction, it changes the emotional pace of the moment. The other person's system naturally adjusts to that rhythm because humans are constantly reading cues of safety, tension, openness, or pressure without consciously realizing it. Eye contact, silence, tone of voice, and timing all become part of that unspoken communication. When these elements are steady and relaxed, they can signal emotional safety, not because of any technique, but because there is no inner tension being projected outward. People tend to feel more open around someone who is not trying to force a reaction or fill every space with effort. It creates room for authenticity, where both sides can just exist without feeling evaluated or rushed. A lot of misunderstanding happens when this is turned into a method to get a specific outcome from someone. When it becomes a strategy, it loses its natural effect because people can sense when something is being used to produce a result. What actually creates connection is not control over the moment, but comfort within it. That comfort comes from self-regulation, emotional steadiness, and the ability to sit in uncertainty without trying to fix or fill it. There is also a deeper psychological layer to why silence and presence feel so strong. Silence removes distraction, which makes people more aware of subtle emotional signals like posture, facial expression, and energy. If someone is anxious in silence, that anxiety fills the space. But if someone is calm, the silence feels spacious instead of heavy. It becomes a shared moment rather than a gap that needs fixing. That's why the same silence can feel uncomfortable in one situation and deeply connecting in another. At the same time, the idea of masculine and feminine energy is often oversimplified online. In real human behavior, it's more accurate to think in terms of initiating versus receiving or structure versus openness. In intimate moments, when one person is more grounded and receptive, it can naturally invite the other person to soften, slow down, or become more emotionally present. This is not about roles or rules, but about emotional balance between two nervous systems responding to each other. What matters most is intention. When presence is used as a way to get a reaction, it becomes tense underneath, even if it looks calm on the surface. But when presence comes from genuine ease, curiosity, and comfort with yourself, it naturally changes how others experience you. You don't have to work as hard to be understood or felt because your energy is already clear. In the end, the real shift is not about learning how to behave a certain way, but about becoming less reactive internally. The less you rush to fill space, prove yourself, or manage perception, the more naturally connection has room to develop. And that kind of presence is not something you switch on for someone else, but something that grows from being at peace with yourself in the moment you are in. What often gets misunderstood is the idea that you can create a certain response in someone else by doing the right things. In reality, what you are doing is shaping the emotional environment, not controlling the outcome. A relaxed presence, natural eye contact, and comfort with silence don't work because they trigger something specific on demand, but because they remove tension from the space. And when tension is gone, people become more open, more aware, and more emotionally available in ways they might not even fully recognize in the moment. The deeper shift here is internal, not external. The more secure you become in yourself, the less you rely on constant validation, constant talking, or constant effort to feel worthy in an interaction. That security changes how you carry yourself, how you respond, and how you allow moments to unfold without rushing them. Over time, this creates a very different kind of connection with people, one that feels lighter, more natural, and less forced, because it is no longer built on trying to secure a reaction, but on simply being fully present. And that is really the core of it, not learning how to act a certain way to influence someone, but learning how to be so comfortable in your own presence that nothing in the interaction feels like it needs to be controlled or fixed. When that happens, connection stops being something you chase and starts becoming something that naturally forms when two people are simply able to meet each other without pressure, fear, or performance getting in the way.